My daughter-in-law made sure everyone at the wedding knew I was the pathetic spinster. She put me alone at the losers' table and spread cruel stories about how I was a pathetic spinster that not even the father of her own child wanted. But when a mysterious stranger whispered to me, "Pretend you're with me through dinner," the night that should have been the nightmare of my life turned into the sweetest revenge I could have ever imagined. But before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and write in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love to know how far our stories are reaching. As I sat alone at the farthest table in the room, watching everyone have fun at my only son's wedding, I couldn't help but wonder how I got there. My name is Louise, I'm 42 years old, and I spent the last 23 years raising Michael alone after his father disappeared when he found out I was pregnant. It wasn't easy, but I managed to give my son everything he needed: love, education, and values. Michael grew up to become a talented lawyer. It was at the law firm that he met Chloe, an ambitious young woman from a traditional, wealthy family. From the first moment I met her, I felt that something wasn't right. She would look me up and down, as if she was sizing up some second-hand merchandise. Her comments were always loaded with a disdain she didn't even try to hide. "So, Louise, did you never think about getting married again? It must be so hard living like that," she would say with fake sweetness during family dinners. "Michael tells me you never got over being abandoned while pregnant. What a trauma, right? Some women just can't hold on to a man." I would always respond with a polite smile, swallowing my anger. I was happy raising Michael. Not everyone needs a partner to feel complete. Of course, she would reply with that venomous smile. It's what all the single women say to sleep better at night. Michael seemed not to notice these cruel jabs. He was completely enchanted with Chloe, and I didn't want to be the mother who interfered in her son's happiness. So I swallowed my concerns and tried to get closer to her, even when everything in me screamed to keep my distance. The wedding preparations began, and to my surprise, I was practically excluded from everything. Chloe and her mother, Beatrice, made all the decisions. When I suggested helping with the invitations or the decorations, I was met with impatient looks. "Don't you worry, Louise," Beatrice would say with the same condescending tone as her daughter. "We have everything under control. You already have so much to worry about on your own. Besides, we want an elegant wedding, with a certain standard." The implication was clear. I didn't have the necessary refinement to contribute to the perfect wedding they were planning. The night before the wedding, during the rehearsal dinner, I felt the first real blow. Chloe gathered everyone to explain the table arrangements. "And Louise," she said, pointing to the seating chart in the hall, "you'll be at table 15, over there in the corner." I looked at the chart and saw that table 15 was the most distant from the main stage, practically hidden near the entrance to the restrooms. I noticed the pitiful glances from the other guests. "Wouldn't it be better if she sat at the main table?" Michael asked, finally noticing something was off. "She is my mother, after all." Chloe put on that rehearsed smile I knew so well. "Darling, the main table is only for couples. Since your mother is, well, we thought it would be better to make her comfortable with other people in the same situation." Then she lowered her voice, but not enough for me not to hear. "We don't want her looking like an abandoned puppy in the official photos, do we?" Michael hesitated for a moment, but ended up giving in, as he always did. I realized then that the wedding would be just the beginning of a life where my son would always choose his wife's side, no matter how unfair it was. The morning of the big day, I tried to cheer myself up. I put on my navy blue dress, which I had bought especially for the occasion. I made sure to look impeccable. Hair, makeup, everything perfect. I wouldn't give Chloe the pleasure of seeing me defeated. The wedding itself was beautiful, I have to admit. The church was decorated with white and gold flowers, and my son was radiant at the altar. I cried when he said his vows, proud of the man he had become, yet fearful of the family he was joining. But it was at the reception where the humiliation truly began. Upon arriving at the elegant ballroom of the Mountain Ridge Resort, I was greeted by one of Chloe's bridesmaids, who led me to my table with a malicious smile. "Here is your table, Mrs. Louise," she said, pointing to a small table in the farthest corner of the room. "Chloe thought you would be more comfortable away from the center of attention. You know, single women of a certain age often feel out of place at these events." I sat down and observed who my table companions would be. An elderly lady who couldn't stop talking about her cats, a distant cousin of Chloe's who clearly had a drinking problem, and two bored teenagers who spent the whole night staring at their phones. No one bothered to speak to me. From my isolated corner, I could see Chloe circulating among the guests like a queen, occasionally stopping to whisper something and glance in my direction, followed by malicious giggles. I didn't need to be a genius to know I was the topic. "Poor Louise," I heard her say to a group of guests near my table, her voice deliberately loud enough for me to hear. "Can you imagine being abandoned, pregnant, and never finding a man again?" Michael practically raised himself, poor thing. She was too busy crying in corners. The peak of humiliation came when Chloe decided to make the formal introductions. She grabbed the microphone and began to introduce the important people at the party. "And of course, I can't forget to mention Michael's mother," she said, pointing to me in my isolated corner. Louise, who raised Michael on her own, a true warrior, always focused on work and her son, never had time to find another love, right? Or maybe no man was interested enough to take on a woman with baggage, with children, a past. The entire room turned to look at me, some with pity, others with that condescending smile I knew so well. I felt my face burn with shame as I forced a smile and waved politely. "But who knows? Maybe today is your lucky day," Chloe continued. "We have several single uncles around, although most are looking for someone, well, a little younger. No offense, Louise." Laughter echoed through the hall. I saw Michael with an uncomfortable expression, but he said nothing to defend his own mother. In that moment, something inside me broke. I had dedicated my life to my son, and now he was allowing his wife to publicly humiliate me. I was about to grab my purse and leave discreetly when I felt someone pull out the empty chair beside me. I looked up and saw a man of about 45, well dressed in a dark grey suit that highlighted his broad shoulders. He had a strong face with piercing brown eyes and a smile that seemed sincere, a rarity in that environment. "Pretend you're with me," he whispered, sitting down beside me naturally. I was speechless for a moment, looking at him in confusion. "I saw what just happened," he continued, his voice low and warm. "No one deserves to be treated like that, especially not the groom's mother." "You don't even know me," I replied, still wary. He smiled, a smile that reached his eyes. "I'm Arthur, a childhood friend of Chloe's father, but I clearly don't share the family's values. And you must be Louise, the incredible woman who raised that talented lawyer on her own." I felt something strange in my chest, a mix of surprise and gratitude for this stranger, who seemed to see beyond the stories Chloe was spreading about me. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. Arthur shrugged. "Let's just say I have a particular aversion to people who use their power to humiliate others. Besides," he added with a playful smile, "it would be an immense pleasure to be seen as the companion of the most elegant woman at this party." Something in the way he spoke, with such sincerity, made me feel beautiful for the first time that night. I looked at him for a long moment, weighing my options. Could I continue to sit alone, absorbing the humiliation, Or could I accept the help of this charming stranger and maybe, just maybe, give Chloe a taste of her own medicine? Okay, I finally replied. What's the plan? Arthur's smile widened. First, we're going to give them something to really talk about. He took my hand and kissed it delicately, his eyes fixed on mine. Do you trust me? For some inexplicable reason, I did. And that's how the night that would completely change the course of my life began. The effect was almost immediate. Arthur was clearly someone important. I noticed it from the looks of recognition he received from several guests. Soon, I saw Chloe watching us from the other side of the room, her face a mixture of confusion and irritation. She's watching us, I whispered to Arthur. Great, he replied with a wink. Let's give her something to watch. Arthur began to act as if we were a long-time couple. He poured me champagne, leaned in to listen to what I was saying, and laughed at my jokes with genuine interest. But most surprisingly, he was truly interested in what I had to say. So you started your own interior design business? He asked, genuinely impressed when I mentioned my small company. Yes, I started with small projects when Michael went to college. I needed something to keep me busy when the house felt empty, I explained, surprisingly comfortable sharing details of my life with this stranger. That's incredible, Louise. Raising a son alone is already a huge accomplishment. But to build a business at the same time, you're extraordinary. His words seemed sincere, without the condescending tone I had grown accustomed to. It was refreshing to be seen as someone admirable, not a charity case. As we talked, I noticed several people starting to watch us. The losers' table suddenly seemed like the most interesting place at the party. Even the teenagers put down their phones to pay attention to our conversation. Who is he? I heard one of Chloe's aunts ask another. I've never seen Louise with anyone before. That's Arthur Monroe, the other replied with a respectful tone. He owns that luxury hotel chain. What is he doing with her? The murmur spread quickly through the room. Arthur Monroe. Suddenly the name made sense. I had read about him in business magazines, a successful entrepreneur, known for his philanthropic work and his discretion regarding his personal life. And now, for all intents and purposes, he appeared to be my date. You're that Arthur Monroe? I asked in a low voice. He smiled, slightly embarrassed. Guilty. But that doesn't matter right now. What matters is that Chloe looks like she's about to choke on her glass of champagne. I glanced in her direction and saw that Chloe did indeed look stunned. She was whispering frantically to her mother as they both stared our way. Michael, beside her, looked equally confused. The expression on Chloe's face, that mix of shock, anger, and yes, envy, was like a balm to my wounded pride. It didn't take long for Chloe to decide to intervene. She came over to our table with that artificial smile I knew so well. Louise, I didn't know you knew Arthur, she said, her voice strangely high-pitched. What a pleasant surprise. You never mentioned having such an illustrious friend. Arthur stood up politely but kept a hand lightly on my back in a protective gesture that surprised me. Chloe, congratulations on the wedding. Everything is beautiful, he replied cordially, but there was a subtle coldness in his eyes. Thank you, but I'm curious. How do you two know each other? Louise never mentioned, well, anyone in her life, she said, looking at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We always assumed she was, too lonely to have a social life. Before I could respond, Arthur spoke. Some of life's best stories are the ones we keep to ourselves. Don't you agree? Not every relationship needs to be publicly displayed to have value. The elegant but pointed comment silenced Chloe for a moment. She blinked, clearly not used to being contradicted, especially at her own wedding. Of course, she replied, recovering. Well, I hope you're enjoying the party, even in this corner. Unfortunately, we had to arrange the tables by status, and she trailed off. Well, you understand. By status? Arthur asked with false innocence. Then it's interesting you placed Louise here. Considering her intelligence, elegance, and the brilliant son she raised alone, I would say her status is quite high. Unless, of course, you're measuring people by more superficial criteria. Chloe's face turned red. I didn't mean... I mean, it was just a matter of logistics. Actually, Arthur said with a charming smile, we were just thinking of dancing. The music is excellent. By the way, who is your decorator? Louise has done fantastic work with her interior design projects. Maybe you should hire her for your new house. He held out his hand to me, and without hesitation, I took it. As we walked towards the dance floor, I could feel Chloe's furious gaze on my back, and I savoured every second of that small victory. She's furious, I commented, trying to suppress a smile. That's just the beginning, Arthur replied, leading me to the centre of the floor. Do you know how to dance? It's been so long I don't even remember, I confessed, suddenly nervous. Don't worry, just follow my lead. And I did. Arthur was an excellent dancer, and soon we were gliding across the floor as if we'd been dancing together for years. The band was playing a slow song, and his arms around my waist made me feel protected and valued. Everyone is watching, I whispered, feeling simultaneously exposed and powerful. Let them watch, he replied. They're seeing what they should have seen all along, an extraordinary woman who deserves to be celebrated, not hidden. As we danced, I saw the official wedding photographer approaching, clearly interested in the mysterious couple now commanding the dance floor. Do you mind? He asked, raising his camera. Not at all, Arthur replied, pulling me closer. After all, these moments deserve to be immortalized, don't they, my dear? I smiled at the camera, knowing those photos would be in Michael and Chloe's official wedding album forever. A permanent record of the night the pathetic spinster stole the show with one of the most sought-after men in the room. The music ended, but Arthur didn't let go of my hand. Instead, he led me back to the table, now strategically positioning himself so we could be seen by everyone. He ordered champagne for us and began asking me questions about my life, my dreams, my interests, questions no one had bothered to ask in a very long time. Throughout the night, I noticed a shift in people's attitudes. The same guests who had previously looked at me with pity now seemed curious, even envious. Chloe's aunts, who had treated me with condescension before, now tried to get closer to find out more about my relationship with Arthur. How long have you known each other? One of them asked, barely concealing her curiosity. Long enough, Arthur replied enigmatically, winking at me. And why have we never heard of you before, Arthur? Another asked, her tone suggesting she doubted the authenticity of our relationship. Not everyone has to announce every aspect of their lives, he replied smoothly. Louise and I prefer quality over publicity. Isn't that right, my dear? The quiet revenge was sweeter than I could have ever imagined. Every shocked glance, every confused whisper, every expression of disbelief from Chloe's friends and family felt like a small victory. The night continued like that, with Arthur by my side, making me feel like the guest of honor instead of the pathetic single mother who should be hidden away. I saw Chloe's face get redder and redder with rage every time someone mentioned what a lovely couple we made. But the real turning point came during the traditional bouquet toss. All the single ladies to the dance floor, the DJ announced. I stayed where I was, with no intention of participating in a tradition that would only serve to reinforce my available and desperate status in Chloe's eyes. Come on, Louise, Chloe called out, her tone falsely cheerful. Who knows, maybe it's your lucky day. Maybe you'll finally get a man after all these years. It was a trap. I knew it. She wanted to humiliate me one more time, putting me in the middle of much younger women, all eager to catch the bouquet. But before I could respond, Arthur stood up. Actually, he said, his voice calm but projected enough for everyone to hear, I don't think Louise needs luck or a bouquet to validate her worth. She already has everything a person could want: integrity, talent, beauty, and a generous heart. Things that, unfortunately, not even a fairy tale wedding can guarantee for those who don't possess them naturally. A stunned silence fell over the room. I saw Chloe's face contort with rage, and for a moment, I felt a satisfaction I had never experienced before. It wasn't just about defending my honor, it was about someone finally exposing Chloe's cruelty for what it really was. She tried to laugh it off, as if it were all a big joke. Oh, come on. It's just a fun tradition. Some traditions, Arthur replied, only serve to perpetuate outdated ideas, like the notion that a woman needs a man to be complete, or that a bride has the right to humiliate guests at her own wedding. There were some murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Chloe seemed to shrink several inches, her queen of the ball glow suddenly extinguished. Michael approached us, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. Mum, what's going on? It was the first time that night he had really spoken to me. I looked at my son, the boy I raised with so much love, and felt a mix of love and disappointment. Nothing, dear, I replied calmly. I'm just enjoying the party with Arthur. You never mentioned an Arthur, Michael said, looking suspiciously at the man beside me. Arthur extended his hand to Michael. Arthur Monroe. A pleasure to meet Louise's son. She talks a lot about you. She's proud of the man you've become, though perhaps a little disappointed in your ability to stand by silently while your mother is publicly ridiculed. Michael had the decency to look ashamed. He shook Arthur's hand automatically, clearly surprised. Monroe? As in Monroe Enterprises? The one and only, Arthur confirmed with a friendly smile. I hope you value your mother as much as she deserves, Michael. Women like Louise are rare, strong enough to raise a son alone, kind enough to tolerate insults for the love of that son, and gracious enough not to ruin your wedding, even when it would be completely justifiable. I saw something shift in my son's eyes. Recognition, perhaps shame. He looked at me, then at Arthur, and then at Chloe, who was now by his side, trying to smile as if nothing was wrong. Mum, we should talk later, he finally said. Of course, son, I replied with a serene smile. Enjoy your day. It's your celebration. As Michael walked away, leading a visibly shaken Chloe, Arthur turned to me. Did I go too far? He asked, genuinely concerned. It was perfect, I replied, feeling a wave of liberation wash over me. It was as if, after years of making myself small so as not to bother anyone, I finally had permission to take up space. You always had that right, he said, and there was something in his eyes that made me believe he really meant it. You just needed someone to remind you. The night wore on, and Arthur remained by my side as if it were the place he was always meant to be. We danced 2 more times, chatted with other guests who suddenly seemed very interested in getting to know me, and even shared some stories from our own lives with each other. I learned that Arthur had been divorced for 5 years, had no children, and dedicated much of his free time to a foundation that helped single mothers get on their feet financially. I told him more about my journey raising Michael, the challenges and the joys, and how I had built my design business from scratch. You are truly remarkable, Louise, he said at one point, as we sat in a quieter corner of the room. Most people would have broken under the pressure you faced, but you flourished. His words warmed me from the inside out. Not because I needed validation, but because he seemed to genuinely see my strength, not just my circumstances. The party began to wind down around midnight. Chloe and Michael were getting ready to leave for their honeymoon, and guests were lining up to say their goodbyes. Arthur and I stayed back, watching the scene. "I think we did it," he commented, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Did what?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Changed the narrative. You're no longer the poor single mother. Now you're the mysterious woman with the charming entrepreneur. And your daughter-in-law learned a valuable lesson about public humiliation." I laughed at the description. "I don't know if that's better or worse." "It's different," he replied. "And sometimes, different is all we need to break people's expectations and their sense of entitlement over our lives." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just the handsome, successful man who had come to my rescue, but someone who seemed genuinely kind. Someone who had chosen to spend his evening defending a stranger simply because it was the right thing to do. "Why did you do it?" I asked again, needing to understand. "Why did you care what was happening to me?" Arthur thought for a moment before answering. "My mother was also a single mother. She faced the same kind of prejudice, the same petty assumptions. When I saw what they were doing to you, I just couldn't stand by. And to be completely honest, there was something about you from the moment I walked into this room that caught my attention. A quiet dignity, even when they were trying to take it from you. There was a story there, a pain perhaps, but now was not the time to explore it. Instead, I reached out my hand and lightly touched his. "Thank you," I said simply. "You turned what could have been one of the worst nights of my life into something special. And you gave me the sweet satisfaction of seeing Chloe's face when she realized her plan to humiliate me had spectacularly backfired." He turned his hand so our palms met, his fingers lightly intertwining with mine. "The night doesn't have to end here, you know." I felt a blush creep up my neck, something that hadn't happened in years. "What are you suggesting?" "Nothing inappropriate," he replied quickly. "Just, there's a nice coffee shop near here that stays open late. We could continue our conversation without all this." He gestured around at the wedding spectacle. "Social pressure." The proposal was tempting. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately to prolong this unexpectedly pleasant evening. But another part, the cautious part that had been hurt before, hesitated. "What if this is just part of the show?" I asked, giving voice to my fears. "The perfect revenge against the terrible daughter-in-law. But then we go back to our separate lives." Arthur looked me straight in the eye. "Louise, the show ended the moment the last person stopped paying attention to us. This is just you and me now, two people who might enjoy each other's company a little longer. No pretense, no agenda, just possibility." There was something so genuine in his words, in his eyes, that I felt my defenses start to crumble. After years of putting everyone's needs before my own, maybe it was time to allow myself this small indulgence. "Okay," I decided. "Let's go get that coffee." The smile that lit up Arthur's face made my heart skip a beat in a way it hadn't in decades. We got our coats and headed discreetly for the exit, while everyone's attention was still focused on the newlyweds. On our way out, we passed by Chloe and Michael. Chloe shot me a look that was a mixture of rage and confusion. It seemed her perfect world had been turned upside down, and she didn't know how to process the fact that the pathetic mother-in-law she had so despised was leaving the wedding on the arm of one of the richest and most respected men in the city. "Leaving already?" she asked, trying to maintain her composure. "The party has just begun." "For us, it began hours ago," Arthur replied with a polite smile. "And now we have other plans." Michael looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. There was confusion, yes, but also something like admiration. "Mom," he said, his voice low. I, uh, we need to talk when I get back from the honeymoon." "Of course, son," I replied, giving him a quick hug. "Enjoy your trip. We'll talk when you get back." Chloe couldn't resist one last jab. "What a surprise, Louise. You and Arthur Monroe. Who would have thought? It must be recent, right? Or have you been hiding him all this time?" Her tone implied that our relationship was clearly fabricated, a pathetic attempt to seem less lonely. It was my turn to smile with confidence. "Some people prefer to display every aspect of their lives for external validation, Chloe. Others understand the value of discretion." I paused deliberately before adding, "That's something you might learn someday. After all, a marriage is much more than just one big event, isn't it?" Her eyes widened at the unexpected response, and for a moment, the perfectly composed Chloe seemed speechless. "Congratulations again on the wedding," I finished. My tone was perfectly friendly, though my eyes conveyed a different message. It was exactly what I expected. As we walked away, I heard Arthur whisper, "That was brilliant." "I learned from the best," I replied, feeling lighter than I had in years. We stepped out into the cool night, and as we walked toward Arthur's car, I noticed I was smiling. It wasn't just the satisfaction of revenge, though that was certainly part of it. It was the feeling of having finally reclaimed my dignity, of having refused to be belittled, of having shown Chloe, Michael, but most importantly myself, that my worth didn't depend on being with someone, but that I deserved someone who truly valued me. The late-night coffee shop was exactly as Arthur had described it, cozy, discreet, and with an atmosphere that invited conversation. We sat at a corner table, away from the few other people still there at that hour. "What will you have?" Arthur asked. "A cappuccino would be perfect," I replied, still feeling slightly unreal, as if I were living someone else's life. While he placed the order, I took the opportunity to observe him more closely. Under the soft light of the cafe, I could notice details that had been lost in the dramatic lighting of the ballroom. The small lines at the corners of his eyes when he smiled, indicating a life of genuine expressions. The way his hands moved with confidence but without arrogance. The absent wedding ring on his left finger, confirming his story of divorce. "Are you analyzing me?" he asked with a smile when he turned his attention back to me. I was caught off guard, but decided to be honest. "Yes, I'm trying to figure out who Arthur Monroe really is when he's not playing the role of a knight in shining armor, avenging single mothers at hostile weddings." He laughed, a rich and genuine sound. "Fair enough. Ask whatever you want to know." "Why did you really help me tonight? The whole truth?" Arthur took a sip of the espresso he had ordered, considering my question. "The whole truth has several layers," he began. "Yes, my mother was a single mum, and seeing how you were being treated infuriated me. But also—" He paused, as if deciding how much to reveal. "I also saw something in you that caught my attention even before the whole scene with the microphone." "What?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Dignity," he replied simply. "You were sitting at that horrible table, clearly segregated, but you held your head high. You weren't hiding, or begging for attention or pity. There was a quiet strength in you that, well, that fascinated me." His words took me by surprise. For so long I had seen myself through the lens others used to judge me. The single mother, the woman who couldn't keep a man, the poor thing who sacrificed her personal life for her son. I had never considered that someone could look at me and see strength, let alone dignity. I didn't feel very dignified, I confessed. I felt humiliated and invisible. And to be honest, Part of me was relishing the small revenge of seeing Chloe's face when you showed up. After all the cruel things she said, it was satisfying. That says more about them than it does about you, Arthur replied, his eyes meeting mine with intensity. Some people can only feel important by diminishing others. Your daughter-in-law seems to be one of those people. And as for revenge, he shrugged with a slight smile. Sometimes a small dose is exactly the remedy we need, especially when it's achieved simply by showing your true worth. Chloe, I sighed, thinking of the young woman my son had chosen to share his life with. She really seemed to enjoy making me feel inferior. From day one, it was as if she needed to put me in a little box labeled failure to feel secure. Insecure people often attack what they secretly admire or fear, Arthur observed. Perhaps your independence, your strength as a single mother, is something she secretly envies or fears she doesn't possess. I had never thought of it that way. Do you think she's afraid of not being a good mother someday? Or maybe she's afraid that if she ever faced adversity like you did, she wouldn't have your strength to overcome it. People who grew up with everything handed to them often fear their own fragility. There was an insight in his observations that made me look at him with renewed interest. You seem to understand a lot about human nature. In my line of work, you learn to read people, he replied with a small smile. And in life, you learn to recognize patterns, especially after making your own mistakes. Our coffees arrived, bringing a natural pause to the conversation. I took the moment to reflect on how strange this situation was. Sitting in a coffee shop after midnight with a man I barely knew, yet who somehow seemed to understand parts of me that I myself had forgotten. And you? I finally asked. What's your story? The divorce, the foundation for single mothers? It sounds like there's a lot more to it. Arthur nodded, slowly turning the cup between his hands. My mother raised me alone after my father decided a family was too limiting for his dreams of being a musician. She worked 3 different jobs to keep me in school. She never complained, never showed how hard it was, but I saw it. His eyes softened with the memory. She passed away 7 years ago. Cancer. One of my biggest regrets is that she didn't live to see the success of the hotels. Everything I did was for her, to prove her sacrifice was worth it. I'm sure she knew, I said softly. He smiled, a melancholic smile. As for the divorce, I married young, to someone very much like your daughter-in-law, in fact, obsessed with status, appearances, the perfect package to show off to others. It took me a while to realize there was no substance behind the facade. What happened? She cheated on me with one of my partners. Classic, isn't it? He laughed, but without humor. The interesting thing is, it wasn't the infidelity that ended the marriage. It was the realization that we had never really known each other. We had lived like actors in a play about the perfect couple, always worried about what others would think, never truly being authentic with each other. That struck a chord with me. How many times had I felt like that at my parents' house, at school meetings, teachings, at social events, like an actress playing the part of the brave single mother, as if my life were a performance for others, never truly seen or understood in its complexity. Since then, Arthur continued, I decided I prefer uncomfortable honesty to comfortable falsehood, which explains why I couldn't stand by and watch the show your daughter-in-law was putting on at your expense, and why I'm here with you now, talking about things I don't usually share on a first date. He paused, his eyes meeting mine. If this is a date, of course. I felt a warmth spread across my face. What if it is? I asked, surprising myself with my boldness. Then I would say I'm having the best first date of my life, he replied with a smile that made my heart race, even if the circumstances were unconventional. Unconventional is a polite way of putting it, I laughed. Who would have thought my best date in decades would start with a public humiliation at my son's wedding? Life has a peculiar sense of humor, Arthur agreed. Sometimes our lowest moments lead us to our highest destinies. There was a depth in his words that resonated within me. We make a good pair, don't we? Both disappointed by the expectations of others, both searching for something more authentic. Maybe that's what brought us to this coffee shop today, he replied, his eyes meeting mine. The mutual recognition of souls searching for the same thing, authenticity in a world of appearances. There was something so sincere, so devoid of pretense in his manner, that I felt comfortable in a way I hadn't experienced in years, without the need to keep up appearances or prove myself. "How's your design business going?" he asked, gently shifting to lighter territory. I brightened at the question. My work was a genuine source of pride. It's growing, actually. I started by doing small projects for friends, but now I have a regular clientele, and even hired an assistant recently. What's your design style? Let me guess. Something that combines functionality with warmth? Spaces that feel like they embrace people? I looked at him, surprised. How did you know? Arthur smiled. Just a hunch based on what I've learned about you tonight. You value substance over appearance, comfort over ostentation. I imagine that's reflected in your work. That's exactly it, I admitted, impressed by his perception. I believe spaces should serve the people who inhabit them, not the other way around. Many of my clients are young families and busy professionals who want a home, not just a magazine spread. That sounds a lot like the values we try to implement in our hotels, Arthur commented. We want guests to feel like they've found a second home, not just a pretty place to take photos for Instagram. The conversation flowed naturally from there, covering our work philosophies, favorite books, movies we loved and hated, and places we dreamed of visiting. There was none of the tension or expectation that usually accompanies a first date, perhaps because it technically wasn't a date, or perhaps because we had begun our connection in such an unusual way that the usual social conventions no longer seemed to apply. I didn't even notice how much time had passed until the owner of the coffee shop politely approached to inform us they were closing. "Wow," I said, checking my watch. "It's almost 3 in the morning. I haven't stayed up this late since Michael was in college." Arthur also seemed surprised by the time. Time really does fly when you're... He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "With someone who makes you forget to look at the clock." We left the coffee shop and stopped on the sidewalk. That awkward moment of indecision that follows a pleasant end to an evening. The air was cool, and I instinctively adjusted my shawl around my shoulders. "Can I take you home?" Arthur offered. "My car is parked near the hotel." I hesitated. On one hand, it was late, and a ride would be welcome. On the other, accepting his ride seemed to cross another line, transforming our interaction from a charade into something potentially real. But after a night of rediscovering my own courage, I decided I deserved to see where this could lead. "That would be very kind," I finally replied. We walked back to the hotel in a comfortable silence. The parking lot was nearly empty now. Most of the guests had already left. The only sound was the click of my heels on the pavement and the distant noise of the cleaning crew dismantling the decorations inside the ballroom. "Here we are," Arthur said, stopping beside a sleek black sedan. He opened the passenger door for me, an old-fashioned gesture that made me smile. The car's interior was luxurious without being ostentatious, exactly as I would have expected. During the drive to my house, we talked quietly about the city, the route he was taking, the changes in the neighborhood where I lived. It was casual conversation, but there was an underlying tension, an unasked question hanging between us. What happens now? When Arthur parked in front of my small townhouse, I felt a pang of sadness. The magical night was coming to an end, and normal reality was about to resume its place. "Here we are," he said, turning off the engine, but making no move to get out of the car. "Thank you," I said. "And well, for everything tonight." "It was my pleasure," he said, and I could hear the sincerity in his voice. More than I expected, actually. We sat in silence for a moment, the air inside the car charged with unspoken possibilities. "Louise," Arthur began, turning slightly to face me in the darkness of the car, "I would like to see you again, not as part of a performance or revenge, but just as ourselves." My heart sped up. After so many years dedicated exclusively to Michael and my work, the idea of letting someone into my life was both exciting and terrifying. "I'd like that," I replied before fear could stop me. The smile that lit up his face was visible even in the dim light. "How about dinner? Tomorrow night?" "Tomorrow? Why wait?" he asked simply. Why wait indeed? After 2 decades of postponing my own happiness, putting everything and everyone before my needs, why should I wait another day? "Tomorrow would be perfect," I agreed. Arthur got out of the car and walked around to open my door. As we walked to my front door, I felt a wave of gratitude for this strange turn my life had taken. What had started as a night of humiliation had transformed into something completely unexpected. "So, until tomorrow," he said when we reached my door. "Until tomorrow," I repeated, feeling strangely young again. For a moment, I thought he might kiss me, and I was surprised to find myself wishing he would. Instead, he took my hand and brought it to his lips, in a gesture that somehow managed to be both old-fashioned and intensely present. "Good night, Louise," he said, his voice low and soft. "Good night, Arthur," I replied, stepping inside with a smile I couldn't contain. As I closed the door and watched from the window as Arthur returned to his car, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to tomorrow. Not for Michael's sake, or for work's sake, but for my own sake. It was an almost forgotten and infinitely precious feeling. I woke up the next morning with the strange feeling that I had dreamed it all. The humiliation at the wedding, Arthur's arrival, our late-night conversation at the coffee shop, the look of shock on Chloe's face as we left together. It seemed too surreal to have actually happened. But then my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Good morning. Just confirming our dinner tonight. I'll pick you up at 7. Can't wait to continue our conversation without a hostile wedding as a backdrop. Arthur." I smiled at the screen, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. It hadn't been a dream after all, and the sweet revenge against Chloe was just the beginning of something that promised to be much more meaningful. Our dinner that night was the first of many. Arthur was everything I could have ever wished for in a partner. Attentive without being smothering, strong without being domineering, successful without being arrogant. And most importantly, he saw me, really saw me. Not as the poor single mother, but as a whole woman, with her own dreams, desires, and talents. Michael and Chloe returned from their honeymoon 2 weeks after the wedding. To my surprise, my son called me the day after they got back, asking to visit me alone. When he arrived, he seemed nervous, almost ashamed, an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was a teenager and had broken my favorite vase playing ball in the house. "Mum," he began, sitting on my living room sofa, "I need to apologize to you." "For what?" I asked, although I had a good idea. Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he'd made since childhood when he was uncomfortable. "For the wedding, for the way Chloe treated you, and how I did nothing about it." It wasn't right. I felt my heart swell with love for my son. Despite everything, he had realized his mistake, and that meant a lot to me. Thank you for saying that, I replied softly. It means a lot to me. Chloe and I had a long talk during the honeymoon, he continued. She, well, she wants to apologize too. I think seeing you with Arthur Monroe made her realize she had completely misjudged you. I couldn't help but smile at the irony. So it took a rich and successful man for her to see me as a person worthy of respect? Michael had the decency to look ashamed. It wasn't just that. It was the way he talked about you, how he defended you. It made us realize how unfair we had been, how unfair I had been. He paused, seeming to gather his courage. But are you and he, really together? Or was it just what? I asked, a part of me wanting him to verbalize his suspicion. Just to show Chloe she was wrong? A kind of revenge? I considered his question. Initially, yes, I admitted honestly. When Arthur came over and suggested we pretend to be together, I saw a chance to reclaim some of the dignity Chloe had tried to strip from me. And yes, seeing her expression when she realized her pathetic mother-in-law was accompanied by someone like Arthur was satisfying. Michael nodded slowly, processing my honesty. But what started as a pretense quickly turned into something real, I continued. Arthur and I discovered we have a lot in common. We're getting to know each other, and it's good. Very good, in fact. My son's face lit up with a genuine smile. That's great, Mum. You deserve someone special in your life. After everything you did for me, everything you sacrificed. It wasn't a sacrifice, Michael, I interrupted gently. It was a choice, one I would make again without hesitation. In that moment, I realized something fundamental had shifted in the dynamic between my son and me. For the first time since he was a child, Michael was seeing me not just as his mother, the person whose identity was defined by caring for him, but as a complete woman, entitled to her own happiness. Chloe would like to invite you to dinner, he added, seeming slightly apprehensive, to apologize properly. I considered the offer. Part of me wanted to refuse, to keep my distance from someone who had treated me with such contempt, but another part, the part that had raised Michael to be compassionate and forgiving, knew that holding a grudge would only poison our future relationship. Tell her I accept the invitation, I finally replied, but Arthur will be coming with me. Michael smiled, looking relieved. Of course. In fact, I think she's counting on it. She wants to meet him properly. I bet she does, I replied with a small, ironic smile. The same Chloe who told me that women of a certain age should accept their loneliness with dignity now wants to get to know my boyfriend better. Michael had the decency to look embarrassed. She said that? Oh my God, Mum. I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was that bad. There was a lot you didn't see, Michael. But that's in the past now. After Michael left, I reflected on how life could change so quickly. In just a few weeks, I had gone from a single mother relegated to the shadows to a woman in a flourishing relationship with newfound respect from those around her. And it all began with an act of petty revenge that transformed into something much larger and more meaningful. The dinner with Michael and Chloe was less awkward than I had feared. Chloe was visibly nervous, lacking her usual arrogant confidence. Arthur kept a protective arm around my waist throughout the night, a silent reminder that I was no longer alone. Louise, Chloe said at one point, when the men were busy discussing a bottle of wine. I am truly sorry about the wedding. My behavior was unforgivable. I looked at her, trying to see beyond the polished surface. Why did you do it, Chloe? Why so much cruelty? What did I ever do to you? She looked away, seeming genuinely ashamed. Nothing. You never did anything but treat me with kindness. She hesitated, as if struggling to find the words. I think I always had this image of the perfect marriage, the perfect family. And you, I didn't fit into that picture, I finished for her. The single mother, the constant reminder that not all stories follow the traditional script. Something to be hidden in a corner, out of everyone's sight. Chloe nodded, her eyes meeting mine with what seemed to be real sincerity. It was horrible of me. I have no excuse for what I said, for the cruel things I spread about you, as if you being a single mother was some kind of moral failing, and not an act of incredible strength. Do you know what's most ironic? I asked. If you had just treated me with respect, I would have never met Arthur. It was your cruelty that, in the end, brought me this new happiness. Chloe's eyes widened slightly at that revelation. You two? You didn't know each other before the wedding? No, I replied simply. Arthur saw me alone, heard the terrible things you were saying, and decided to intervene. What started as an act of kindness blossomed into something more. She looked genuinely shocked. So you weren't— It wasn't all a plan to make me look bad? I laughed softly. Chloe, you didn't need any help looking bad that night. But no, it wasn't a plan. It was just the universe working in mysterious ways. Sometimes, our worst moment leads us to our best destiny. In the following months, my relationship with Arthur blossomed, while my relationship with Chloe slowly transformed into something more respectful, if not exactly warm. Michael watched this evolution with evident relief, clearly happy to no longer be torn between the two most important women in his life. A year after we met at that wedding, on a quiet Sunday morning, Arthur asked me to marry him during breakfast on the terrace of his country house, the same place where we had taken our first walk together. You transformed my life, Louise, he said, holding my hands in his. Before I met you, I had success, but I had no real purpose. You showed me what it means to truly love someone, not for their image or status, but for their heart, their mind, their essence. With tears in my eyes, I accepted. Not because I needed a man to complete my life, but because I had found someone who truly saw me, valued me, and loved me exactly as I was. When we announced our engagement, Chloe's reaction was almost comical, a mixture of shock, envy, and a desperate attempt to seem genuinely happy for me. How wonderful, Louise, she exclaimed, with that tight smile that never reached her eyes. Who would have thought, right? After so much time alone. Yes, Chloe, I replied serenely. Sometimes life surprises us. The important thing is to be open to those surprises instead of being trapped by judgments and prejudices. She had the decency to blush. Our wedding was an intimate celebration, with only the people who truly mattered. Michael was Arthur's best man, and to my surprise, Chloe and I had developed a civil enough relationship that her presence didn't ruin the day. During the reception, as we danced our first dance as husband and wife, Arthur leaned in and whispered in my ear, "Do you remember that first night, when I asked you to pretend you were with me?" I smiled, remembering the moment that changed everything. How could I forget? It was when I started to win back my dignity, and I started to find my heart again, he replied. Who would have thought that an act of petty revenge against a cruel daughter-in-law could lead to so much love? I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling complete in a way I had never experienced before. Sometimes it takes a moment of theatre to find the deepest truth. And sometimes the best revenge isn't just living well, it's finding a happiness you didn't even know you were looking for. Every now and then, I still think about that night at Michael and Chloe's wedding, about the humiliation I felt, the isolation, the anger. But now I see that moment not as a wound, but as a turning point. If Chloe hadn't tried to belittle me, Arthur would never have approached. If we hadn't pretended to be together, we never would have discovered how much we truly belonged to each other. Life has a strange sense of humor sometimes. What begins as our greatest humiliation can transform into our greatest blessing. What seems to be our lowest moment may just be the universe positioning us exactly where we need to be to find our greatest joy. On the second anniversary of our marriage, Arthur and I decided to throw a party at our house, an elegant but cozy celebration, very different from the ostentatious spectacle that had been Michael and Chloe's wedding. As I looked around our living room filled with friends and family, I noticed Chloe sitting alone in a corner for a moment. Michael had gone to get them drinks, and she seemed strangely vulnerable without his presence. There was something in her gaze, a mix of admiration and perhaps a bit of regret, as she watched me interact with our guests. I decided to approach her, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. "A toast?" I offered, extending a glass. Chloe seemed surprised but accepted the drink. "What are we toasting to?" "To new beginnings," I replied, "and to lessons learned." She nodded, a genuine smile replacing her usual carefully composed expression. Lessons learned, for sure. There was a moment of comfortable silence between us, something that would have been unthinkable 2 years prior. "You know," Chloe said finally, "I used to think I knew exactly how life was supposed to be. Perfect marriage, perfect family, perfect house, all following a specific script." She paused, taking a sip of champagne. "But watching you and Arthur, the way you found each other, how you built something so real from the most unlikely circumstances, it made me question a lot of what I believed." "Life rarely follows the script we imagine," I replied. "And it's a good thing it doesn't," she concluded, surprising me with her sincerity. "You and Arthur have something that Michael and I are still trying to build, something authentic, not just for show." It was a surprising confession coming from Chloe, and I realized that perhaps she was finally maturing, shedding some of the toxic attitudes that had led her to treat me so cruelly. "Authenticity takes time," I said gently, "and it starts when we stop worrying about what others think and start focusing on what really matters." Just then, Michael joined us, looking slightly apprehensive to find us talking so intimately. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, handing a glass to Chloe. "Everything's great," I replied with a genuine smile, "just sharing some thoughts on life and its unexpected paths." Michael looked from me to Chloe, a smile of relief spreading across his face. "I never thought I'd see the day when you two would be chatting amicably at a party." "Life is full of surprises," I replied, seeing Arthur approaching from across the room. "Some of them are true blessings in disguise." Arthur reached my side, putting a loving arm around my waist. Even after 2 years, his touch still sent that same electric current down my spine. "What are we talking about?" he asked. "About how life sometimes takes us on the most unlikely paths to give us exactly what we need," I replied. He smiled, that same smile that had captivated me on that first night. Like when a cruel daughter-in-law inadvertently introduces her mother-in-law to the love of her life. Chloe blushed deeply, but there was a reluctant smile on her lips. "I think I deserve that." Or like when a kind stranger whispers, "Pretend you're with me," and ends up finding much more than he expected, I added, looking at Arthur with all the love I felt. "Some call it coincidence," Arthur replied, his eyes meeting mine. "I prefer to call it fate." As we moved away to greet other guests, I couldn't help but reflect on the incredible journey that had brought me here. From a single mother struggling to raise a son alone to a fulfilled, loved, and respected woman. From a victim of humiliation to the protagonist of my own story. The revenge had been sweet, yes, Seeing the shock on Chloe's face when Arthur sat beside me, watching her envy as we left the wedding together, witnessing her humiliation when she finally realized the wrong she had done. But the real victory wasn't the momentary revenge. It was discovering that I deserved more, that I was worthy of respect, love, and happiness. A few months after that party, I received surprising news. Michael and Chloe were expecting their first child. Despite our complicated past, I felt a genuine joy at the news. I was going to be a grandmother. When Chloe called me personally to tell me, I sensed a hesitation in her voice. "There's something else," she said, after sharing the details about the pregnancy. "Michael and I would like for you, well, for you to be an important presence in the baby's life. Not just as a grandmother, but as a role model of strength and resilience." She paused, her voice becoming softer. I didn't have that in my life. A woman who showed that it's possible to face adversity with dignity. And if our baby is a girl, well, I want her to have better role models than I did. Her words took me completely by surprise. Of all the turns my life had taken in recent years, this was perhaps the most unexpected. Chloe not only acknowledging me as an important part of the family, but actively valuing me for the qualities she had once despised. "It would be an honor," I replied, sincerely moved. When I hung up the phone, I found Arthur watching me with a smile. "Good news?" he asked. "The best," I replied. "I'm going to be a grandmother. And it seems Chloe has finally understood that being a single mother wasn't my weakness. It was my greatest strength." Arthur hugged me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Life really has an incredible way of coming full circle, doesn't it? The woman who tried to humiliate you for being a single mother now wants you to teach her child values." "Or daughter," I corrected with a smile. And yes, it's a beautiful irony. 6 months later, I was in the hospital holding my newborn granddaughter, a little girl that Chloe and Michael decided to name Louise in my honor. As I looked at that perfect face, I felt Arthur beside me, his presence constant and comforting. "She's beautiful," he whispered, "just like her grandmother." I looked at Michael, who was watching his daughter with the same look of unconditional love I had felt when he was born. I looked at Chloe, now without makeup, without her expensive jewelry, just an exhausted but radiant new mother. And I realized that perhaps the true circle life had closed wasn't about revenge or justice, but about healing and renewal. "You know," Arthur said as we left the hospital that night, 3 years ago, if someone had told me I would be married to the most incredible woman I'd ever met, and that we would have a granddaughter with her name, I would have found it impossible." "Life is full of impossibilities that become reality," I replied, squeezing his hand. "Especially when they start with 'pretend you're with me,'" he added with a smile. As we walked to the car under the starry sky, I reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought me to that moment. What had begun as an act of petty revenge against a cruel daughter-in-law had transformed into the greatest blessing of my life. Sometimes our greatest pain leads to our greatest joy. Sometimes, in the moments when we feel most humiliated, most vulnerable, is when the universe is preparing our greatest gift. And sometimes, when we pretend to be who we want to be, we discover that person was inside us all along, just waiting for the chance to emerge. The revenge had been sweet, yes, but the love, acceptance, and fulfillment that came after were infinitely sweeter. And in the end, the best revenge wasn't seeing Chloe humiliated, but seeing myself finally valued, loved, and celebrated exactly as I always deserved to be. Now, if you liked this story, click on this next video that is appearing on the screen, because in it is a story of betrayal and revenge like you've never seen before.